I'm Helen, therapist, author, and your host of the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About podcast. And today I am thrilled to be chatting with one of the world's leading experts on stress, Dr. Aditi Nerurkar. She was named one of the 100 women to know in America, and who I first heard on Mel Robbins' podcast. I knew I had to invite her onto my own too. Dr. Aditi is a Harvard stress expert, and I invited her here today, not only because I wanted to meet her, but also to talk about her brilliant new book, The 5 Resets: Rewire Your Brain and Body for Less Stress and More Resilience. The stats on stress are staggering, affecting just so many of us. And I know that this conversation will help bring some clarity, help you feel less alone in your stress, and help you transform your relationship with stress. Dr. Aditi, welcome. It's absolutely wonderful to finally have you on my podcast.
It is such a joy. I am a true fan of your work. So this is such a pleasure to be here with you.
I know it's going to be such a enriching, nourishing conversation. And I know listeners to this podcast will get so much from your wisdom. You've got so much to give, haven't you? And Dr. Aditi, I first heard, you probably won't be surprised by this because it was such a blow up episode, but I first came across your work via Mel Robbins, and you did an incredible interview with her, and I think it was one of her most downloaded episodes ever, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I've spoken to Mel 3 times, and there have been 3 episodes that have come out. And that's right. The most recent episode was, she sent me a text afterwards that it was the most downloaded single day in the history of our podcast, which was such a gift.
Congratulations. That's amazing. But attached to that is the reality and the truth of how many people sadly struggle and resonate with your subject, which is stress. So although incredible for you, actually your work is reaching so many people who need it.
You know, it's the sad reality, right? So when you look at the data, 70% of people, this is across industry, age, gender, race, nationality. When you look at the data right now, a snapshot of mental health, 70% of people are struggling with some feature of stress and burnout. That's like saying, Helen, in a room of 30 people, 21 people are struggling with stress and burnout. So this is no longer just an exception or a one-off. It is truly the rule. And so the reason, so much of the work that I do, which focuses on stress, burnout, building resilience, and mental health, is because most of us are struggling. So if this is you, you are not alone, and it is not your fault. And there is a way. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. There is a way to find your way out of this stress and burnout tunnel and see a light and shine a light on mental health.
I love the way you brought in there about you're not alone. And so often people, I know from my own work and my own stress, that we feel so isolated in that moment, don't we? And we can feel so lonely with that stress. But you say there so clearly, you're clearly not alone. 21 out of 30 people.
And what's so fascinating about stress is that there is a stress paradox. So I shared that data with you. 70% of people, that's like in a room of 30 people, 21 people, right, are struggling just like you. And yet we have a stress paradox. And the stress paradox, it's one of my frameworks, and it simply means that, we are all collectively struggling, but we feel isolated in that struggle, which is such a, mind bender. And I noticed this when I had a busy clinical practice in Boston seeing patients, and my clinical practice was specifically focused on stress management. It would be a packed waiting room. There would be patients from all walks of life waiting to see me to discuss their various stress struggles, and yet no one would talk to each other. Packed waiting room, people waiting shoulder to shoulder, just looking down at their phones or looking up and not really engaging. Then they would come into my office, the door would close, and they would burst into tears. And so I would see, my 2 p.m. patient, my 2:30 patient, my 3 o'clock patient, my 3:30 patient, always, of course, their own particular struggles, but always that same underlying tenet of stress, burnout, mental health, trying to find that sense of resilience. And so there is this great stress paradox. And unfortunately, yes, the past several years, there's been a wonderful real acceptance that mental health is important. It's come out of the shadows. Now, you and I know in our day to day work of seeing patients and clients, mental health has always been an issue. But now the rest of the world knows it too. And so, if there's one silver lining over the past few years, it's that people have finally recognized the value and importance of mental health. But yet, we still are facing the stress paradox every single day, whether it be the workplace or when you're social gatherings. No one is really coming forward sharing that they are struggling with stress or burnout because there is still such a taboo. And so I hope that a lot of my work and your work and those of us who work in this space can really shine a light on these issues, because it is not a exception. It is the rule. All of us are struggling in one way, shape, or form. You and I, we're just mere mortals in this whole era of stress and burnout all around us. So of course it's going to affect everyone.
Yeah, and I heard where you said there that people are still feeling that shame around coming forward to talk about it. What do you think we'll get into stress a little bit more a little bit later into the podcast, but why do you think the stigma is there? What are you seeing people coming forward? Why do you think the stigma's there?
I think it is a historical stigma, right? We have what I like to say is that there is an epidemic of toxic resilience. So, what is resilience? Resilience is your innate biological ability to adapt, recover, and grow in the face of life's challenges. However, over the past several years, we've seen this resurgence of toxic resilience. And so, what is toxic resilience? It's like a change or a sinister approach to what true resilience is. Toxic resilience is a mind over matter mindset. It's productivity at all costs. It's all systems go all the time. True resilience is celebrates your ability to say no, understands your need for rest and recovery, and really respects human boundaries. The reason we're seeing this real rise, an unprecedented rise in stress and burnout, and particularly still we're not able to erase that shame, is because of toxic resilience and the resilience myth. So, what is the resilience myth? It's simply that this idea, this false notion, by the way, that resilient people can't get burned out. Resilient people don't have stress because, hey, I'm resilient. And in fact, that is very much couched in, it's a toxic manifestation and really couched in hustle culture. And so when you are talking about this shame and stigma around stress and burnout, I mean, I shared the data. It's that the majority of people are facing this. And yet there is such a shame to discussing it. And that doesn't make very much sense when you look at this idea of toxic resilience. And it is really in every faction of society, particularly in the workplace, but also in schools. We're taught from a very young age that tolerating large amounts of discomfort is what resilience is all about. When in fact, we are, socialized to really accept toxic resilience rather than lean into our true resilience. And so if you are feeling a sense of stress or burnout, you may say to yourself, I must not be that resilient if I'm feeling this. Or conversely, I'm resilient. I don't have stress. I don't have burnout. It's certainly what I said to myself. So my personal story is that I was a stressed patient and found my way out of stress and then vowed to become the doctor I needed during that difficult time. And then now I'm an expert on stress, resilience, burnout, and mental health. But at the time when I was a stressed patient, I went to go see a doctor myself. I was in my medical training. And that doctor, after doing the whole load of testing, said to me, it's just stress. Try to relax. My first thought when I heard that, stress. Stress doesn't happen to people like me. I'm resilient because I was also living the resilience myth. So I think many of us, it's not a conscious choice, of course, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. We are all kind of trapped in this idea of the resilience myth and toxic resilience. And so that is, I think, the root of where a lot of this shame comes from. Now, after 25 years of doing this work, I can proudly, when I feel a sense of burnout or if I'm stressed, I can proudly say, yeah, I'm burnt out or stressed without it being a reflection on my character. It's just a symptom of the environment because people are resilient. It's the systems that burn us out.
And that's a beautiful way of putting it. And you're really normalizing the human experience there, aren't you? And really understanding what's happening to yourself. I love the way you brought in your own story and you bring that into the book so beautifully. Actually, your book, I'm going to hold it up for the camera for those that are watching. You wrote this brilliant book. Your journey here has been amazing. You've worked with so many people, thousands of people, haven't you? And your book, The 5 Resets, rewire your brain and body for less stress and more resilience. And I'm going to turn to page 5 actually and read out what you wrote here because I've turned over so many pages, Aditi. I've turned over
Oh,
so
and I can join you.
But page 5, I loved it because what you did was you looked at all of these people that you'd spoken to about stress over the years. And you said, everyone has a personal story. But after your thousands of conversations with people, you found 5 universal truths. Do you want to read them out or shall I?
Either one works. So the basis of the 5 universal truths, what they are and where they stem from, is that I was a busy physician in clinical practice. And like I said, I would see one patient at a time in my waiting room and then in my exam room. And I would get this same similar story of stress, burnout, and this resilience myth and toxic resilience. And then during the pandemic, I transitioned to speaking to large audiences. Initially, it was virtual. Now it's in person. And, 50,000 people, 10,000 people from all walks of life in different countries. And that is when I really understood the scope of how stress, mental health, burnout, resilience play into nearly every single person. So during the course of my speaking career and a lot of the work that I've done, I've probably engaged with over 200,000 people by now, right, in my various talks. And it's the same sort of nuggets, these 5 universal truths that I've noticed. So whether you're a factory worker in Asia, a childcare provider in North America, if you are a CEO in Europe, these are the 5 universal truths that I noticed about stress and burnout. Number 1, I feel anxious when faced with uncertainty, and I struggle to control my emotions during difficult experiences. The second universal truth, I don't feel rested in mind or body and spend most of my days feeling depleted. Number 3, I have so much stress that I accomplish very little. Yet at the same time, I feel too burned out to be productive. This is particularly important at this moment in time, and we can talk a little bit about why that is. Number 4, I have so many roles to fill between work, family, and community that I have little sense of myself anymore. This is particularly important to those of us who are, working parents. We see this in many capacities, and the data really reflects this. And number 5, I don't find any purpose and meaning to my life while I face so many personal or professional struggles. And so these 5 universal truths to me really stood out as the key themes of why I really wanted to write this book. Many of my patients prior had said many of them work in publishing, various publishing houses had reached out over the past 10 years and asked me to write a book about stress and burnout. At the time, it just didn't feel like the right time because I was the medical director of a clinical practice. I was seeing patients. I had just become a new mother and I had a baby at home. And so it was just too many new things for me. And I had, I couldn't really fully engage in writing this book. But once I saw that level of stress and burnout, and I really recognized these universal truths by speaking to these large audiences, it was my light bulb moment because it was no longer just one-on-one in a clinical practice with one patient and one doctor talking about one stress story, but rather seeing these very large swaths of people who are feeling the exact same way. I hadn't understood up until that moment when I started speaking to these large audiences just how vast stress, burnout, mental health, and this need for resilience really was. And that's really when it came to the surface for me. And my audiences, believe it or not, when I would give talks at the end of that 1 hour, they would say, "Where's your book?" And I would say, oh, I don't really have one. I haven't written one. And they would say, why not? We need more of this. And so, in fact, my audiences are the ones who really encouraged me to write about a lot of this because I was seeing it and I was experiencing it and, meeting so many different kinds of people. And so the Five Resets was born as a result of that. I also just want to share that, now I very freely share my personal story, how I was a stress patient and became a doctor with an expertise on stress. However, at the start, I've been doing media and health communication for many years. I was very reluctant to share that story. Those of us who work in healthcare, mental health, counseling, or any sort of caregiving field often, whether, and that could be you're a parent or you're caring for your ailing elderly relatives. When you are a caregiver, you are so focused on the other, taking care of the other person that you don't really think about yourself or, your personal story. And so that really, for me, very much doctors are socialized to play small. We don't talk about ourselves. It's about you, the patient. What do you need? And so for me to share that personal story, become vulnerable, and really lean into my own stress struggle as a way to illustrate that stress truly does happen to everyone, and even someone with an expertise on stress. It was my sort of villain origin story, so to speak. And, it really shows the breadth and depth of this particular struggle of stress that so many of us feel.
How did it feel to come forward and start to share your story in a world that kind of hides from sharing, don't they? You were talking at the beginning about we don't want to talk about our stress. How did it feel for you to actually come out and to thousands of hundreds of thousands of people and share your story too?
In a word, terrifying. So back about 25 years ago, when I started doing my research, I did one particular study that I published in Archives of Internal Medicine or the Journal of the American Medical Association. Really got a lot of press. It was about doctors prescribing mind-body therapies to their patients, like meditation, yoga, etc. And I was interviewed by many, many people here in the U.S. and abroad. And, NPR, National Public Radio, Diane Sawyer, ABC World News Tonight. These are like some of Diane Sawyer was actually my first interview ever in media. And everyone asked me the same question, what got you interested in studying stress? My patients would ask me all the time, Dr. Nerurkar, what got you interested in this? It's such an unusual field to, go into. What got you interested in studying stress? My canned response for all those years was always, oh, it's my patients. It's my patients. And I would just kind of like laugh it off and say, oh, it's my patients that got me interested. And finally, when I wrote this book, I believe it was my editor or perhaps my literary agent. And I said, I think I want to tell the real story of why I got interested in studying stress. And because it can't just be, it was for my patients. Yes, it was for my patients, but what was the real story? And, and then I just really sat down. I talked to my husband, some of my best friends, and said, I think I'm going to do this. It felt incredibly vulnerable to share because, at that time, now I'm very comfortable the other way sharing my story. But at the time, it felt like there was, when in medicine, we wear a white coat. When you see a patient, it feels like a sense of armor. You're protecting yourself. Again, doctors are socialized to play small. I am the vehicle of information and knowledge and sharing and, in many cases, diagnosing and curing. But it's not about my story. You keep it hidden. That's why so many physicians suffer from lots of mental health issues and they don't come forward because of this sort of, armor that we wear, the suit of armor, the white coat, so to speak. So for me to share my story, it felt incredibly difficult initially. I wrote it out, and when I sent my first manuscript in, I thought I'm going to send two versions. Maybe I don't include the story. Oh no, should I include it? I was, going back and forth, but I truly knew, Helen, that the only way, when you are, yeah, now I am a, physician and an expert in this topic, but when you want to really convey a sense of connection, stress is a difficult experience. Yes, it is all over right now when I share the data and the snapshot. But the first step in creating a sense of connection with another human, especially going through a difficult experience like stress or anything difficult, is normalizing and validating the difficult experience. And so, how can I normalize and validate the difficult experience that you are going through when you're struggling with stress and burnout? Well, it's about sharing my personal story. And so I was sharing a lot of my patient stories. There are many patient stories all over the book. And I thought, well, who's the ultimate patient here that I'm not talking about? It's me. And it was difficult. But it's funny, once I shared my story, it felt so liberating and natural. And so, in coming forward, I released a lot of that shame. And I think ultimately, when you are able to do that for yourself, when I publicly share my story in front of large audiences and every interview I do, and it's fine because ultimately, that particular experience for me, which was quite debilitating, was a stampede of wild horses across my chest in my second year of medical training. It's truly what helped me become the person that I am. So every experience shapes us to become who we are. And in many ways, had I not had that experience, I wouldn't be here. So I believe, it's all part of the journey, but it was incredibly challenging and you have to be ready for it. So, if you are feeling a sense of shame or blame, that you're feeling a sense of stress and burnout, you don't have to write a book and share your personal story about stress. You can do it, baby steps, baby steps. But I do think there is so much value to coming forward and sharing with your inner circle, with your trusted people. Of course, everyone knew why my inner circle, of course, everyone knew why I decided to pursue this. They were living the struggle with me when I was going through it. But when I actually came forward and, told my story, they all asked me, "Are you okay? Are you feeling okay?" Initially, I said, "No, I'm not feeling okay at all." It was terrifying. It felt so, for lack of a better word, I felt like, you're naked on the street kind of feeling of like really bearing your soul. But now it is so part and parcel and an intrinsic, integral part of my experience, but also the five resets. Because,
Yeah.
you know, if someone is reading the book or hearing me speak and I'm sharing that I personally struggled as a stressed patient, it's like, of course, that person knows what I'm going through because she went through it as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing it in the book. I always think when someone shares their personal story, experts who come forward and write their books, it makes people feel that they can trust you, that you really get it, you really understand, that you see someone. And they're all the qualities that we look for, aren't they, when we're trying to work through something? Someone gets me, someone understands me. And you've done that beautifully in the book. I wonder whether it would be helpful now because you talk through what stress is in the book. And we all have this kind of idea, we know what it is, but you split it up into healthy and unhealthy. I think it would be useful now to maybe define stress to the people listening.
Yeah. So, when you and I say this whole conversation, we've been talking about stress, like feeling stress or my stress struggle or your stress struggle, the universal truths about stress. When we are using that term in the context of, I'm so stressed, or it's been a stressful week, or a year, or 5 years for many, what we're describing is scientifically called maladaptive stress. There are two kinds of stress, and they are not created equal. Maladaptive stress or unhealthy stress, it's the bad kind of stress. It's unproductive, gets in the way of your everyday life, and it causes a lot of the mental and physical health manifestations that you may think of. So, anxiety, insomnia, irritability, you're quick to anger, or feeling a sense of overwhelm. Also, physical manifestations of stress. I shared my own personal stress struggle. And in my story, I had that stampede of wild horses, a sense of palpitations. However, there is also a different kind of stress, healthy stress, or good stress. This kind of stress is productive, it's motivating, it moves your life forward. In scientific terms, this is called adaptive stress. Everything good in your life was created because of a little bit of healthy stress. So, what are some examples of healthy stress? Rooting for your favorite sports team, planning a vacation, falling in love and getting married, maybe getting a promotion or a new job, having a child. All of these sorts of events that happen in your life are forms of healthy, positive stress. They move your life forward. The goal of life is not zero stress. It's actually biologically impossible to not have stress. You need a little bit of healthy stress to, in fact, get you up out of bed in the morning. The goal of life is healthy, manageable stress that can serve you rather than harm you. And so, in my work with the 5 resets, this is not about removing stress altogether. It's about transforming your relationship with stress. So it goes from being maladaptive, that runaway kind of stress that gets in the way of your everyday life, back to healthy levels so that it can help you thrive rather than merely survive.
Yeah, beautifully explained, beautifully explained. And I think it's so important for that differentiation there for people to understand that you need a little bit of stress, that little bit of that raring to go, isn't it? You talk in the book beautifully about what happens in the brain and the body with maladaptive stress. Do you want to just share that here? Because it isn't just the mind, is it? It really does affect our entire being, our entire system.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to really think about this connection of maladaptive stress or unhealthy stress and how it affects you. The first is understanding the mind body connection. So, the mind body connection is really a basis of a lot of my work. And it's simply this, it's a long kind of woo woo term, but there's a lot of robust data to support it. And it simply means that your mind and your body, your brain and your body are inextricably linked and connected and communicating at all times. So, what's good for your body is good for your brain and vice versa. Examples of the mind body connection in everyday life. It might be the first time you're hearing this term, but examples of the mind body connection in everyday life. Your palms sweating before a big meeting, or butterflies at falling in love, or when you feel your heart racing before something exciting. These are all manifestations of the mind body connection. And like gravity, it's all around us and really influencing our day to day. The beauty of a lot of the work, in the mind body connection is that not only can you understand it and be aware of it, but you can also tap into it to influence it to help you thrive in this new normal. And so, knowing that the mind body connection exists and that you can influence it, another important idea to consider, particularly when it comes to stress and the brain, is this idea of neuroplasticity. It's a long, fancy word, but it simply means that your brain is a muscle. When you do better, you feel better, and it's all in the doing. The same way that you would train your biceps if you want to get stronger, you can train certain parts of your brain to build better connections so that you can rewire your brain for less stress. And why do I bring up the mind-body connection and this idea of neuroplasticity? It's because when you have a sense of stress, so short-term acute stress, right? Let's say, I don't know, you have something that's happening just in the day or in that week. Your brain and your body are expertly designed to handle short bursts of stress. It's a process in the brain and the body called the fight or flight response. It starts in the amygdala. The amygdala, again, a kind of fancy scientific word. It's a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain. And the purpose of that amygdala is cave person mode. And what that means is it is focused purely on survival and self-preservation. And that amygdala gets turned on, and then there's this acute stress, your fight or flight response. And what happens in the fight or flight response is that, your pupils dilate, your heart starts racing, you start breathing quicker and shallower because the oxygen, you're trying to get a lot of oxygen into your body so that it can go to your muscles, so that you can run. So fight or flee the tiger. The challenge now is that we no longer these, and this is evolutionarily when we were all tribes people, when we were cave people. We would see a tiger in the forest, you either fight it or you run away. That's where the fight or flight response comes from. Now, in modern times, we don't have these tigers in the forest that we're fighting or running away from in the short, acute term. We have chronic, ongoing metaphorical tigers that never seem to go away. We have financial constraints and bills. We have relationship problems. We have a little device that we carry around with us everywhere telling us about every climate disaster and humanitarian crisis all over the world. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between something happening 5,000 miles away or in your backyard. It simply says danger self-preservation, survival. That's the way it communicates. What we call in science, the amygdala is the reptile brain. So while all the other parts of your brain have evolved and grown and changed, your amygdala is still, we call it lizard brain. It's the part of the brain that is not really evolved with the rest of the brain. And so when you're talking about chronic stress and how it affects your brain, because we talked about the good kind of stress, right? So what happens with ongoing chronic stress is that for short periods of time, your brain is doing great. But when it happens on and on and on, that amygdala stays on in the background. And that's the real challenge because your amygdala doesn't really come back to baseline, especially now, it just continually stays on. When that happens over time, it starts influencing other parts of the brain. So, for example, your prefrontal cortex, if you put your hand right on your forehead, it's the area right behind your forehead. That prefrontal cortex is really important. It is what we call general executive functions in science: complex problem solving, strategic thinking, managing, organizing, planning. For lack of a better word, in pop culture, we say it's adulting at its finest. And so that prefrontal cortex is really important. It helps us cope and manage in all sorts of ways. So when you are having this ongoing, chronic, unhealthy, maladaptive stress over time, that's what leads to burnout because it's this ongoing, constant, and so a lot of the work that I focus on is in the 5 resets, particularly in my work, it's to get you out of that amygdala mode and back to the prefrontal cortex. And it's easy to do. It sounds like, these are all these fancy scientific terms for different parts of the brain, but it's to switch off one mode and start another and get your prefrontal cortex back online and back in the driver's seat so you can do all of the things that you need to do and achieve.
I love that. It's you make it all the science. Everything can sound so complicated, can't it? But the ultimate goal is to bring that prefrontal cortex back online. I always remember Deb Dana saying, and I've said it so many times in my podcast, but I just loved it. It was, she talks about the fact that when we're in survival mode, that's how we survive. But the best way for us to survive is to actually be out of survival mode. So our prefrontal cortex is back online. And that's what your 5 resets do so beautifully. They're brilliant. When I read them, they really landed with me. I read them a few times, the actual list, and just let them wash over me. And there's room for breathing when you read them. You can feel, I felt my prefrontal cortex coming back online just reading the 5 points. I'm going to read them out now, and then I would love you to give a little bit of context to these 5 points. But just reading them out here, you talk about the first reset. I'll let you say the rest of them, but this one really resonated for me. Get clear on what matters most. And we get so wrapped up, don't we, in what doesn't matter? And it was wonderful. I loved it. So I just wanted to say that before you went on to your 5 resets.
Yes, you are so right. That first one really lays the groundwork for everything that's ahead. And so what are the 5 resets? They are 5 small but mighty mindset shifts to get you out of survival mode and back to thriving. So get you off the amygdala mode and back to your prefrontal cortex, like we talked about. The first one in particular is important because it kind of sets the roadmap for what's ahead. Get clear on what matters most. When you're feeling a sense of stress, you will often say to yourself, what's the matter with me? Like what's going on? And that inner voice that's berating you and telling you all of the ways that you're not enough, that is your inner critic. We all have that voice inside our head. Not to no one's surprise, that inner critic is actually powered by your amygdala. So it's the same area of your brain that, is the stress response. That inner critic, that voice that says, what's the matter with me? It's actually a self-protective mechanism. It's meant to keep you safe. It's meant to keep you in your comfort zone so you're not trying something new. Unfortunately, what happens is over time, we stay stuck, right? So it's like you keep hearing that voice, what's the matter with me? What's the matter with me? Instead, this reset encourages you to reframe that inner critic's voice. In fact, take the megaphone out of that inner critic's hand when you're feeling a sense of stress. It's not about what's the matter with me. It's what matters most to me. And MOST, M-O-S-T, is an acronym. It's a framework that I have used for myself with many patients to reframe the conversation, that internal monologue, to get you out of the amygdala mode and back to the prefrontal cortex. So M is motivating, O, objective, S, small enough to virtually guarantee your success, and T, timely. What you want to do is create a most goal using all four of those tenets. And then once you have the most goal, you can operationalize it using it something called the backwards plan. And so all of these various strategies are all science backed. They're all in the book. There's 15 strategies and 5 key resets. But that first particular reset sets the ground rules. You know, it's like when you're taking a trip, if you have Google Maps or whatever map you use. When you are really focusing on that first reset, it's less about what is the matter with me and rather what matters most to me. You know, it's like when you are going on a trip, you have, Google Maps is out and you are, figuring out your destination. You have this map, right? And so when you're feeling a sense of stress, the amygdala, like I shared, by design, keeps you in the immediate terms. It's hard for you to think about the map or looking forward or how do I chart this new thing that I want to do, because the amygdala is focused on your immediate needs and your immediate survival by design. And so when you create a most goal, it gets you out of that amygdala mode and back to the prefrontal cortex, where a lot of that complex problem solving, strategic thinking, and planning and organization live. And so that's one of the ways to do it. It doesn't, as you're going through these exercises and the 5 resets and the various frameworks, you'll feel a difference. You'll say like, wow, this is really working. And I do explain the scientific rationale, but it's more important about feeling that sense of, wow, it's working, rather than the science behind it. But there's science behind every single strategy I offer. Also, I just want to say, because I have been a physician for many years, decades, in fact, I have taken care of people from all walks of life with varying resources. So everything I recommend, whether it be in the 5 resets or any of my talks or interviews, will always be cost-free, because it's something that's really important to me. And so cost-free, and then science-backed, cost-free, and time efficient. Also very important to me. I've taken care of lots of busy people. You're a busy person. I'm a busy person. Everyone listening is very busy with their time. And so having managing your stress and trying to get a better handle on your stress should not cause you more stress. Newsflash. And so making sure that things are time efficient is really important to me as well.
Brilliant. I love that. And so that's in your first step, isn't it? The first reset. I loved the way because you talk about this through the book, about all the steps and all the examples you give about the tips and how we can actually use them and action them for ourselves. But one of the things that came in for me, and you brought it up in the book so clearly, was keeping that motivation, because we can be full of great ideas, and we're going to do this, and this is the day I do it, and I start to get on top of my stress. And you bring a great case study in of I can't remember his name now. You bring a great case study and was like, I'm trying it all and I can't sustain it. And you really bring in these ways of actually making it sustainable. So I'd love you to talk about, we'll come to the other resets in a minute, but I'd love you to talk about, how do we stay motivated to do the things that are good for us?
Ooh, what a juicy question. So first off, the key here, and this particular patient that you're recommending, it's everything but the kitchen sink approach, right? It's like this patient came in and he had a binder of all of the things that he wants to achieve, a big, thick binder. And he said, and it was February. And he said, Doc, I made a binder for New Year's as my New Year's resolutions, and it's February and I can't do any of it. So we backtracked a little bit. The reason we make all of these New Year's resolutions, 10, 15 New Year's resolutions, and by February, you're lucky if you can do 1 or 0 in most cases, is because the rule of 2. The rule of 2 states, it's a framework that I've developed, and it simply means that you can only sustain 2 new changes at a time. The reason is, scientifically, your brain, when you are taking up a new habit, a new exercise, anything that is new, even if it's something positive, it is still a stressor on your brain, because your brain has to adapt to something new. And so even that's why so many New Year's resolutions fail, because even if you say, oh, I'm going to do, these 10, 15 things, it's hard to sustain all of those. It's not a personal failing. It is simply how the brain works. So instead, focus on 2 new things at a time. And that is the rule of two. And so the entire book, The 5 Resets, there are many strategies, like 15, 17 different strategies, but you don't do them all at once. You just focus on two at a time. You do those for about 8 weeks. Understand that it takes about 8 weeks for your brain to develop a new habit through the neural processing and the rewiring of your brain. Falling off and getting back up is a part of habit formation. So if you're trying something new and then, week 2 or 3, you're doing great. And then around week 3 or 4, you're like, I haven't done it, whatever it may be, whether it's going to bed early or bringing in some sort of movement in your everyday life or being kinder to yourself or having a, journaling practice, whatever it may be. And then you kind of fall off and you say, you know what? I'm not going to do it anymore. I wasn't going to finish it anyway. I'm weak. Or you might tell yourself all of these things. Instead, you can say to yourself, oh, this is part of the stage of, learning something new. You fall off, you get back up, and you keep going. And so it takes about 8 weeks to build a habit. So aim to do 2 things at a time for 8 weeks. And then once it becomes part of your everyday life, then you can add 2 more and 2 more. And so by the end of whether it be 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, you will eventually reach all of those New Year's resolutions that you set, but just not all at once, because that's simply how the brain works. It's the resilience rule of 2.
That really stayed with me because that felt sustainable and achievable. And I think it's about the way you say it in the book about starting smaller, start smaller, something that feels achievable. So if someone was wanting to say, start journaling, and they say, so they choose journaling and they might choose meditation, and they have this idea that they want to do it every day. So they want to journal and meditate every day. What you're saying is that actually that will take 8 weeks for it to become a habit. Is that 8 weeks of doing it every day, or is that 8 weeks of falling off, coming back on it again? Do we start back at day 1 to achieve those 8 weeks of every day? Or is it the falling off, coming back on again within that 8 weeks that works?
That's a great question. And so I love that you brought this up because it's an important consideration. When you are learning something new, it's more important to do something every day rather than once in a while because it avoids decision fatigue. For example, we can use the example of journaling or meditation or exercise or whatever it may be. Let's say you're a lifelong sedentary person and you say, you know what, I'm going to start exercising. So you book a bunch of different classes at your local gym 3 times a week, 4 times a week for an hour. And so Monday comes around and you plan to go, but something comes up at work, so you don't go. Tuesday, there's a childcare conflict and you can't make it. Same thing with Wednesday, Thursday, and by Friday, maybe you go 1 time or 0 times, more likely. That is more of like the reality. Instead, aim for 5 minutes every day of a walk. So we can start with the exercise regimen. So just every day you're going to walk for 5 minutes. Anyone can do 5 minutes of a walk. Even presidents of countries spend a few minutes every day walking. And so 5 minutes is accessible for anyone. It doesn't require any extra equipment. You just put on, a comfortable pair of shoes and you head outside and you walk for 5 minutes. What you're doing is that you're training your brain. This is about mental fitness. It's not about physical fitness. So for the person who's saying, no, but I, would love to lose, 10 pounds or, to the UK audience, I would love to lose 10 stone or, whatever it may be. And I'm unable to lose this weight. And what's 5 minutes a day going to do anyway? It's not really going to make a difference. What you're doing is you're training your brain. And so you'd want to do a little bit every day, let exercise or daily movement become a habit. And then you can build up to 10 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day and then 30 minutes a day. And maybe you have, once or twice a week. By then you'll have incorporated gym sessions. But when you're starting something new, so now let's use the example of journaling and meditation. Let's say that's like your rule of 2. I cannot tell you how many times, Helen, over the years when I've had patients who, because I have studied meditation, I've trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction. So many people will come to see me and say, I saw you on TV talking about meditation. Teach me how to meditate. And I want to go on this retreat in a month where I'm going to be meditating for 8 hours a day. And so I often will say, I love that you're interested in meditation. The difference between meditation and medication is 1 letter, meaning that it's very powerful stuff, right? It does affect your brain and your body. And so what you want to do is you want to start low and go slow. for whatever it may be, meditation or writing, because often if you do too much all at once, you'll likely, it's too much bandwidth. What you really do see, so let's say with meditation or with meditation or with journaling, when you do stuff all at once, like you say, I'm going to meditate for an hour every day and I'm going to journal for an hour every day, that becomes untenable for everyone because first off, you are building a new habit, which takes a lot of mental adaptability to do that. And then you want to carve out extra time in your day, which is difficult to do. And then you want to have that sense of consistency. So it's really difficult. Instead, if you say to yourself, I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes every day. And I'm going to journal for 10 minutes every day. So let's say you wake up and you're going to say, I'm meditating every morning for 5 minutes and I'm journaling for 10 minutes every night. Chances are you're going to do it because it's just two separate things that you're doing. In fact, I would say instead of saying meditation and journaling, because they're both contemplative, I would in fact, if someone was saying, what can I do for my rule of two? I would say some form of movement and then some form of like contemplative. So, if you want to do 5 minutes of meditation and 5 minutes of a walk, or I want to do 5 minutes of journaling and 5 minutes of a walk, something so there's a little bit of a balance. It will be more, you'll be more, you're more likely to guarantee that you'll actually follow through and keep going if there's one thing that is, a little bit more grounding and the one thing that's a little bit more activating and, getting out of your head and into your body, like a short walk.
Yeah.
There's so many examples of what you could do. The reason you want to do it every day is because when you say to yourself, okay, this is a commitment I'm making, I'm going to build it into my 24-hour day, you're likely to do that. And then, so that question that you asked about the 8 weeks, it takes 8 weeks to build a habit. Falling off and getting back up is part of that 8 weeks. So you don't have to start from ground zero. If you fall off the wagon and you get back up and you start again, just keep going. You'll notice that as you continue doing things, those neural circuits will start forming. The expression if you don't use it, you lose it. In the same way, when you actually use it, you strengthen it. You see in the gym, it's like pumping iron, right? You hear that expression from people who are bodybuilders. In this case, you're pumping neurons. You're actually creating stronger circuits in the brain. So give yourself 8 weeks. And again, the 8-week mark, it doesn't, you don't have to set your calendar saying, okay, 8 weeks from now, this is, maybe it's 10 weeks for you. Everyone, there's a variance, right? So maybe some people it's 7 weeks. Other people could be 12 weeks, but give yourself a lot of grace and compassion in the process. Change takes time. Building new habits into an already overscheduled and full life like you have takes time. So give yourself lots of grace and self-compassion. Understand that you're going to fall off and get back up, and perhaps more than once. I recently started learning a new language, French. I used to speak French and I want to start speaking again. We can talk about, why I decided to learn French. I want to have that sense of beginner's mind, learning something new, joy for joy's sake, because it's just fun. I don't know. I just really enjoy it. It, helps. It gets me in a sense of flow and hours pass like minutes. But I can't, unfortunately, practice for an hour every day just because of, life I'm a working mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, all of the friend. There's so many roles that we all play, right, in our lives. But instead, I can commit to 15 minutes every day. And so I do. And yet, even knowing all of the science, knowing everything, yes, of course, I fell off at week 3 and didn't do it for 4 days because I was traveling and then, for work. And then I returned. And yes, a part of me said, you know what? It's too difficult. I can't do this. I have too much happening. I'll learn another time. And then, the prefrontal cortex kicked in and said, no, it's fun. Let's do this. It's an enjoyable thing. And then I got back on. And then I fell off again and I got back on. But now it's been about 9 weeks and I practice every day. And so it has become a habit. But again, I could fall off and then you just kind of have to get back on. And that sense of ease and gentleness with yourself can go a long way.
I'm curious because I've started learning French as well.
Oh, I went to Paris last year after not having gone for many years.
Beautiful city.
It's
Oh,
just so
beautiful. It's
magical,
so
magical.
beautiful.
I have a dream of retiring in Paris or the Amalfi Coast. And so I can't learn both Italian and French at this moment, and still do the work that I do. So I decided to choose one. Again, it's the rule of two. So yes, you could learn two languages at once, but I'm, spreading it out. So I'm focusing my personal rule of two right now. And again, it changes based on the time of season of life, etc. For me, my two rule of twos right now is focusing on learning French and weight training. Like, doing a little bit of weight training. One of the challenges when you're learning a new language is like you can read it and it's great,
Yes.
but then there's this barrier to speaking.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the habit forming in the beginning when I was learning. I would miss a day and then I'd miss a few days and then berate myself and get back on it. And now it's such a part of my routine. And I've done, and I think you talk about it in your book about habit stacking. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've added it on to something else I do. And it's become a habit. And I'm over that 8-week mark. And it's just something I do every day. And it's time for me to add something else in. I
That's
realize
right.
I need to add a new thing in.
Yeah.
My book, Choose You, is out now and offers you ways to prioritize you, meet your needs, say yes to you, develop a more secure sense of self where you feel you matter, learn to set boundaries, wrap yourself in self-love, find your authentic self, and ultimately choose you in the same way you would want those you love to choose themselves too. Choose You, out now. Aditi, do you want to talk about? I don't want to take. I know we've still got so much to talk about, but I didn't want you to miss not talking about your other resets, even if you just summarize them briefly, because we've only talked about the first reset, but just talking about your other resets about, the finding quiet in a noisy world. That's challenging.
That is challenging. So the second reset is find quiet in a noisy world. And this is particularly important now more than ever. And what does that mean? There's several strategies in this particular reset. It's about the idea that your mental bandwidth is not limitless, right? We all have a finite amount of mental bandwidth. And if you don't find your quiet in this noisy, cacophonous world, it adds to your stress. And so there's several strategies in this particular reset in terms of digital boundaries,
Yeah.
thinking about sleep as a real therapeutic intervention, and several others that can really help you find quiet in a noisy world without saying, I'm going to move to Bali for 6 months for a sabbatical. We don't have that luxury, many of us. We have constraints. We have family constraints, financial constraints. And so, how can you create a sense of respite, rest, and recovery right here in the midst of your messy, overcomplicated, overscheduled life? You can learn to find quiet in your noisy world. And so, there's several strategies there for that.
Yeah.
The next reset, the third reset, is sync your brain to your body. We talked a bit about the mind-body connection at the start of our conversation, and this really leans into learning about the mind-body connection. What is it? Why do we need it? And so that earlier conversation that we had about the mind-body connection, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And it talks about that particular mind-body connection and how you can influence it to decrease your stress and rewire your brain. The fourth reset is come up for air. Now, you would think this would be about breathing. Those breathing exercises are actually in the mind-body connection. And we can talk about breath being a very powerful tool to activate your mind-body connection. But this fourth reset, come up for air, it's about learning how to compartmentalize. And there's various strategies in there to say no to multitasking, because multitasking is a myth, therapeutic writing, and there's all these various strategies in how to compartmentalize so that you can manage in this world right now. And then the fifth reset, bring your best self forward. This is a real culmination of all of the various strategies, leaning into the science of gratitude and self-compassion, and really focusing on your future self, like we talked about at the start of our conversation. When you are living in amygdala mode, it's very difficult to see the future. You often get in your own way. Again, by design, it is what your amygdala is meant to do. Your brain is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was intended. And so this final reset gets you out of that immediacy and that amygdala mode and to start thinking about a future. One idea I would love to share is this idea of horizonlessness.
I love that. I'd love you. Yes, I really want you to talk about this. I've heard you talk about it before. So sorry, I interrupted. Say it again. It's
Horizonlessness. When I first heard the term, it really took my breath away. I was getting interviewed by a journalist, Nina St. Pierre, and she said, "Let's talk a little bit about horizonlessness." I said, "What? What is that?" God, that's exactly how I feel. So it's not a term that I coined. A journalist had coined that term, but it perfectly encapsulates what so many of us are feeling, a sense of horizonlessness. And so, of course, being a scientist, I dug into the science of like, what is horizonlessness and why do we feel like this? And why do we need something to look forward to? The human brain, while we are experts at managing our day to day lives, there is this element of looking forward to something. That's this anticipatory excitement and longing for something. It helps us, it motivates us. In fact, it creates a lot of healthy, positive stress, right? We talked about that earlier in our conversation, that momentum and that creation of forward momentum of looking forward to something. And so, what you are seeing now, the bleak picture that I painted at the start of our conversation, hopefully it's been less bleak in terms of sharing strategies to overcome that sensation. But, in sharing that so many people over the past several years have said it's been the most difficult time of their professional lives. People are really struggling personally. There's so many constraints, right? Large societal constraints that many people really identify with this term horizonlessness, feeling like, there's nothing to look forward to. So, 5, 10 years ago, if you had asked a young person, what are you looking forward to? They may have said, I'm looking forward to graduating, looking forward to my first job or getting a promotion. I'm looking forward to getting married or having children or whatever, traveling the world, whatever it is that people, the younger generation are looking forward to. You could ask someone in middle age, what are you looking forward to? I'm looking forward to retirement. I'm looking forward to seeing my children grow up. I'm looking forward to various different things. And then the elderly, you could ask, what are you looking forward to? Oh, I'm looking forward to this particular vacation or spending time with my family or relaxing or, whatever that particular cohort of people. And now, when you look at the data and you say, what are people really looking forward to? The answer is not much. That sense of forward momentum, of vision, looking forward and seeing something that you're looking to work towards or aspire to for a whole host of reasons doesn't really exist. There is a vacuum. And that is really powered by your stress response because you're so living in the immediate terms. And so much of your human bandwidth is used up in just survival mode that it's really difficult to see this future. And so most of us feel a sense of bleakness and a sense of horizonlessness at this moment, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can rewire your brain for less stress and more resilience. There are so many strategies and tools at your disposal that are science-backed, cost-free, and time-efficient so that you can see a promising horizon for yourself for the future.
I love that you brought that in because I loved it when I heard you talk about it before. And it's about that trusting you because you're an expert and you know what you're talking about, but beginning to trust yourself as well, isn't it? Trust yourself that you can use these tools, that neuroplasticity will work for you too. And I remember watching a video years ago when I was training, when I first heard this term neuroplasticity, and it was far too complicated a term, and suddenly it's everywhere and people are holding on to it. But there's a brilliant video. I can't remember who it's by. I won't even be able to link it in the show notes, but it shows the pathway in the brain of, adding healthy habits and this pathway getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and the unhealthy pathway becoming narrower and narrower and narrower. And that trust in ourselves that the more we engage in those healthy habits that you outlined so clearly in your book, that the healthy pathway, neural pathway, will get stronger. And it's about trusting ourselves with your knowledge and our own self-trust, don't you think?
Yeah, when I think about what neuroplasticity is, it's like I write about this in the five resets. It's a dirt road. So you're starting a new habit. It might even be like a forest without a paved road whatsoever. And so you start doing this particular thing 5 minutes a day. Maybe it becomes, a trodden path and it becomes a dirt road. The more you practice, again, not a lot of time, but some form of, 5, 10 minutes every day, then it becomes a 1 or 2 lane road, paved road, 4 lane highway, and then, the Autobahn. So it takes time, but the more you do it, it really lays down the foundation through a process called neural plasticity, and then another process called neural consolidation, which simply means that there's all this new information floating on in your brain. And when you start doing something again and again, there's a cementing of that new information. And so, yes, and my favorite patients have always been my most reluctant patients. That's always been really fun. People come in and say, this neuroplasticity thing, this rewiring your brain thing, not going to work for me. Try it. Arms crossed and like, let's do it, doc. Very that sense of like, try me. Let's see if it works for me. It's not going to work for me. And then it's my favorite kind of patient because then inevitably, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I continue to see them every 8 weeks. And then they come in and they say, I can't believe it. It actually worked because, you can be resistant to this. And I welcome all forms of reluctance. It's great. You should be, trust but verify kind of approach. Of course, I love that. And so, really, when you are reluctant and saying, this won't work on me, try it and see for yourself because you will be amazed at the power of your brain because your brain is ever changing and evolving. We used to think the brain you got at birth was the brain you had for life. It was like a real grab bag. Too bad you didn't get a good brain. Now we know because of the science of neuroplasticity that it is continuing to evolve and grow and change and take shape based on external stimuli and internal stimuli. I mean, I used to have patients who were 85 years old, 87 years old, doing and learning new things because your brain is a muscle, just like your biceps. The same way that you can train your body in various muscles, you can do the same for your brain, regardless of your age.
Oh, Aditi, I love that. I know so many people will get so much from this episode. I have so many more questions, but I'm so conscious of time, and I really wanted to ask just a couple from my Instagram community because they're so engaged with the podcast and my account. What is the impact of maternal stress on a child's developing brain?
Ooh, I would love to answer this question.
This mother was saying she really feels mothers need more support. And I felt there was so much depth and feeling to that question.
So true. Very deep and meaningful question. So we know that, maternal stress or early childhood adverse events can influence the brain. We talked about neuroplasticity, right? So when things are happening, of course, early in development, in early childhood, but also because of neuroplasticity, you can, in many cases, your brain continues to evolve and adapt. So, getting trauma informed care early on, having access to trauma informed care, and the various things that we've talked about today through various strategies, making sure that you have multidisciplinary care, good access to a therapist, a psychiatrist, a primary care doctor, all sorts of things can actually also help to influence your brain. We know that, therapy talk therapy actually changes your prefrontal cortex. So many things change your prefrontal cortex. And so that question is almost a loaded question because on one hand, yes, like of course we know based on the data that maternal stress does impact the a growing baby. And then also once the baby is early childhood, having some sort of distress of some kind, early traumatic event can of course influence. However, we cannot we have to remove the onus of responsibility away from mothers, right? Because as you are a mother, I am a mother. I remember I was riddled with stress during my pregnancy. And I was often given those messages of don't be too stressed because it's not good for the baby. But sometimes so it's not the fault of the mother, right? So we have to be careful with that question because you have to remove that onus of responsibility off of mothers who are trying so hard to do the right thing. And it's an impossible standard that mothers and, working parents have to uphold. So I appreciate that question so much. I understand the intention behind that question. And yes, it's something that we see, but we also see a real flourishing, and, post-traumatic growth happens in so many people. And we also really want to value and acknowledge that, the onus of responsibility is not on the mother for less stress. We have to change the system. People are resilient. It's the systems that are burning us out, like the impossible demands of childcare and parenting. You're meant to work like you don't have a job and then take care of children you're meant to work like you don't have a family and children to take care of, and then you're supposed to take care of your kids like you don't have a job. So I think that there are so many layers to this question, and it's rife with deeper conversation. And I hope that I've answered it in the best way, honoring the mother and everything that she is going through, and also understanding human development and the brain. Again, like I shared, the brain that you have at birth is not the brain that you have for life. And so you also have the power to shape your brain regardless of what has happened to you in your childhood, or, when you were growing and developing. You have the power and the ability, and I want to help you feel a sense of empowerment that change can happen.
I love the way you said about give you a sense of empowerment. And it reminds me of that. I can't remember who, I think it was through Bowlby or even Winnicott. I think it was Bowlby, about rupture and repair. That even when things, maybe you do feel you've been too stressed, it's amazing your repair work you can do with that will benefit the child. And I felt even with the question, this person has an awareness. And that's a brilliant first step, isn't it? To working towards reducing that stress.
Self-awareness and just having a sense of awareness is truly, you're halfway there.
You are, you really are. You really are. Thank you for your considered answer, though. Will your body get back to normal, whatever we want to term normal here, after experience the pain of stress?
Oh, I hear that person who's asking that question. I see you, I feel you. I have been there myself, acutely debilitating stress during my own stress struggle.
Of course.
And I would say wholeheartedly and reassuringly, yes. Yes, trust in the process. Understand that change takes time, but believe in the process of neural plasticity. Your brain has an ability to regenerate and strengthen in certain ways, and, give yourself time, be patient, and most of all, give yourself a lot of grace and self-compassion on this journey. Understand that self-compassion changes the brain. It dials down the volume of your amygdala, which is that center of stress. And so when you are kinder to yourself, when you're more gentle to yourself, it is truly the fastest path at building a sense of resilience and protecting your mental health.
What a beautiful answer to finish the podcast on. That was perfect. It gave such hope, didn't it? Such hope. Aditi, I have loved this conversation, and I've been so grateful for your time. So grateful for your time, because I know how busy you are. I can't thank you enough. I really can't. Thank you.
Oh, it is all my pleasure. Truly, you are such a beautiful interviewer, and your voice is so soothing. I could listen to you all day.
I feel the same about yours, so thank you. I'll link all your book. And have you got a website, Aditi, as well?
I do. My website is draditi.com, and I am launching a new newsletter every week with my insights, and you can go to my Instagram for the direct link, and my website. It's on Substack. It's called It's Not You, It's Your Stress, and it's linked in my Instagram, which is at Dr. Aditi Nerurkar, or you can also check out my account on LinkedIn, Dr. Aditi Nerurkar.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean so much if you could follow the show, leave a quick rating, and maybe even a review to let others know what you think and whether they may enjoy the conversation too. Your support genuinely means so much. Thank you. Enjoy your day.